The stadium was already exploding with noise before she even walked onto the court. Thousands of fans waving flags, screaming another player's name, and creating an atmosphere that felt completely against her from the very first second. But while most athletes would have looked nervous, frustrated, or mentally shaken by that kind of pressure, she stepped forward with a calm smile on her face, like she had already accepted everything around her. Because deep down she understood something most players never learn in their entire careers. Crowds only control you when you emotionally react to them. And instead of fighting the noise, she decided to use it for herself. Even joking before the match that most people inside the stadium were probably waiting for the other player anyway, causing the crowd to laugh, while completely changing the tension in the arena. Because suddenly she no longer looked like the villain people expected her to become. She looked confident, relaxed, and mentally prepared for whatever was coming next. And when the match finally started, the atmosphere became even louder, with every point won by her opponent sounding like a championship celebration, while every mistake she made brought massive reactions from the stands. Yet somehow the pressure only seemed to make her stronger as the match continued, because while everyone else inside the stadium was emotionally invested in the moment, she stayed locked and mentally focused only on the next point, the next return, the next opportunity. And later she revealed the unbelievable mental trick that helped her survive the chaos around her. Whenever the crowd screamed her opponent's name, she simply pretended they were cheering for her instead, turning negativity into motivation inside her own mind and transforming hostile energy into confidence. And that single mindset slowly changed everything, because while her opponent carried the emotional weight of thousands of fans expecting victory, she played freely, without fear, without panic, and without letting the atmosphere control her emotions, moving across the court with growing confidence while the crowd slowly realized they were watching someone mentally unbreakable, someone who refused to complain, refused to show frustration, and refused to let pressure decide the outcome of the match. And by the final moments, even people cheering against her couldn't ignore the composure they were witnessing, because she never argued with officials, never disrespected the fans, and never lost control of herself despite standing in one of the most uncomfortable environments an athlete can face. But the most shocking moment came after the match, when instead of celebrating loudly or talking only about her own performance, she publicly praised her opponent for bringing new fans into the sport and creating an atmosphere that made tennis feel bigger and more alive than ever before, instantly earning respect from the same crowd that had spent hours supporting the other side. Because people suddenly realized they weren't just watching a talented athlete, they were watching someone mature enough to understand that sports grow through passion, emotion, and rivalries, even when that energy is directed against you. And weeks later, when the two players met again in another highly emotional showdown filled with pressure and non-stop attention from around the world, the story took a painful turn after an injury forced her to stop playing mid-match, leaving the stadium silent as she slowly walked toward the net, disappointed and struggling physically. But in one final quiet moment, her opponent leaned forward and sincerely wished her recovery and strength, showing that beneath all the noise, pressure, cheering, and global attention, there was still genuine respect between two young athletes carrying the future of the sport on their shoulders. And that's why this story became much bigger than a simple tennis match, because it wasn't only about winning or losing. It was about emotional control, mental toughness, respect under pressure, and proving that true champions are not always the loudest people in the room. Sometimes they are simply the ones who remain calm while the entire world around them loses control. The atmosphere inside the stadium felt overwhelming long before the match even officially began, because thousands of passionate fans had already transformed the arena into something far bigger than an ordinary tennis event. Flags covering entire sections of the crowd, non-stop chants echoing through the stands, phones recording every second, commentators struggling to hear themselves speak over the noise, and emotions running so high that every player walking onto the court could instantly feel the pressure in the air. Yet while most athletes placed in that kind of hostile environment would naturally become frustrated, distracted, or mentally exhausted before the first serve was even hit, she walked forward with a completely different energy, calm eyes, controlled body language, and a smile that quietly revealed she had already made peace with the situation around her. because deep down, she understood something most competitors never truly learn. Once you stop viewing pressure as an enemy, it loses much of its power over your mind. And instead of fighting against the reality that the crowd overwhelmingly supported her opponent, she accepted it openly in front of everyone during interviews, even joking that many people inside the stadium were probably waiting for the other player rather than her, causing the audience to laugh while instantly changing the emotional tone of the entire night. Because rather than creating conflict with the fans, she removed the tension completely through confidence and self-awareness. And that decision turned out to be one of the smartest psychological moves anyone could make under those circumstances, since crowds often become more aggressive when athletes react emotionally to them. But when she responded with humor and composure, the atmosphere no longer felt like a personal attack against her. Instead, it became part of the spectacle itself, something she eventually learned how to feed off mentally rather than fear. And once the match started, the pressure only intensified because every single point won by her opponent triggered massive celebrations throughout the arena, while every mistake she made brought loud emotional reactions from fans desperate to witness another unforgettable upset. Yet strangely, the louder the crowd became, the calmer she seemed to look on court, moving with patience, controlling rallies carefully, and refusing to show frustration no matter how emotional the environment around her became. And later she revealed the mental trick that allowed her to survive all that pressure without collapsing emotionally, admitting that whenever the audience screamed her opponent's name, she simply pretended they were actually cheering for her instead. A mindset that sounded almost unbelievable to many people hearing it for the first time, but one that demonstrated elite emotional intelligence, because psychologically, she had found a way to transform hostility into energy, turning noise into motivation rather than distraction. And that small shift inside her mind changed the entire balance of the match, because while the crowd expected their support to create pressure against her, she quietly absorbed the atmosphere and used it to increase her focus instead, proving that true mental toughness is often less about blocking negativity out completely and more about learning how to reinterpret it internally before it damages your confidence. And as the match continued, even neutral viewers watching around the world started realizing they were witnessing something deeper than just a tennis battle, because despite being placed in one of the most emotionally difficult environments possible, she never argued with officials, never glared at the crowd, never acted disrespectfully toward fans supporting someone else, and never searched for excuses whenever momentum temporarily shifted away from her, showing a level of maturity that felt rare in modern sports where athletes are constantly under pressure to react emotionally for cameras and social media clips. But what truly shocked people happened after the match ended, because instead of celebrating herself loudly or focusing only on her own performance, she immediately praised her opponent for bringing a completely new wave of fans into tennis, openly saying the atmosphere was actually good for the sport because it showed how emotionally invested people were becoming in women's tennis. And hearing those words from someone who had spent hours being loudly cheered against shocked many fans, because most athletes in that situation would naturally complain about unfair crowd support or hostile conditions. Yet she chose to respect the bigger picture. Instead, understanding that passionate supporters are ultimately what helps sports continue growing even when they are rooting against you personally. And that emotional maturity became one of the biggest reasons the story spread far beyond tennis itself, because people realized her reaction represented something deeper about life and pressure, especially moments where it feels like the entire world around you is supporting someone else while you stand alone, trying to remain focused. But the rivalry only became even more emotional weeks later when the two players faced each other again during another massive tournament filled with louder crowds, more cameras, and even bigger expectations after their earlier matches had gone viral online, only for the story to suddenly take a painful turn nobody expected, because midway through the match, she began struggling physically, her movement slowing while concern spread across the stadium as fans realized something was wrong. And despite clearly wanting to continue competing, she was eventually forced to retire due to injury, leaving the entire arena silent as she slowly walked toward the net, carrying visible disappointment on her face, because athletes spend years preparing for moments like those only to sometimes have their own bodies stop them at the worst possible time. Yet even afterwards, she still showed incredible class by admitting she actually felt bad that retiring might unintentionally take attention away from how brilliantly her opponent had been playing, openly saying she would rather finish the match and lose than give people excuses to question the result. And that single statement completely changed how many viewers saw the rivalry, because it revealed genuine respect hidden beneath all the pressure, noise, and competition, especially after her opponent quietly wished her recovery at the net in a moment cameras almost missed entirely, proving that despite all the emotional tension, both athletes deeply respected each other as competitors and as people, which is exactly why this story connected so strongly with millions online, because it became much bigger than tennis scores, rankings, or viral crowd reactions, turning instead into a story about emotional resilience, mental strength, handling pressure with grace, and staying true to your character even when the entire atmosphere around you feels impossible to control.